StudyBassers! In this lesson, we're going to talk about slides. What they are, the different kinds of slides, how to make them sound good, and how they're notated. What is a slide? To slide means to glide across or between multiple pitches. So slides can connect a pair of notes, or they can lead into a note, or they can follow one. So we're going to look at the different types of slides, and then I'm going to give you some tips on how to make your slides sound great. The most common type of slide is the connecting slide, and it connects two distinct notes. That means you hear the first note, the starting note, and the ending note clearly with a slide in between. So slides can go up or down. So going up or down. And slides can span one note or many. It just depends on the bass line. But on the bass, it's very common to do half-step slides or whole step slides. And another one that's really popular is to slide from the fifth to the root. So here B to E. Another type of slide slides into a note, either from above or below. So what makes this type of slide different from a connecting slide is that the starting point is either undefined or less defined. So you don't linger on the starting point of the slide. Remember, on a connecting slide, you clearly hear the starting note, the slide, and the ending note. But again, on this type of slide, you just hear the slide and the ending note. So you start sliding as soon as you pluck. Another type of slide is the grace note slide. Now, grace notes are a big topic on their own, and we'll cover them in a future lesson. But basically, a grace note is just a brief or short note that leads into some main note. Now, a lot of times they're hammer-ons, but they can also be slides. So the grace note slide, it's really like a very quick connecting note slide, and they're typically from a whole step or half step above or below a target note. When you arrive at the end note of your slide, there are two possibilities. Don't pluck the end note or pluck the end note. So most of the time you don't pluck the string again when you get to that final note. And this is called a legato slide. So when I reach this note, I'm not plucking the string again. I'm just holding down the note with my fretting finger. Now you might remember that the term legato means long connected notes versus staccato, short and detached notes. There's another use of the term legato, which means not plucked again or not attacked again. So that's the use here. Now when you do pluck the string again, it's called a shift slide. So when I reach that final note, I'm plucking the string again. Another type of slide slides out of a note. So when I do this slide, what I'm doing is I'm muting the string before I reach any distinct ending note. So again, if I were doing a connecting slide, I would be reaching another note. But here, it trails off into silence. So what you have to do is you have to mute the string before you reach any ending note. A lot of musical vocabulary comes from Italian. And two words that you'll hear for slides are glissando and portamento. So a glissando is a slide through fixed pitches. So if you have frets, or if you're on piano where all of the notes are divided up, then you're going to be playing a glissando. Even if it goes by quickly, you don't necessarily hear all of those divided pitches. but they're there. If you have a fretless electric bass, or you have another instrument like cello, violin, double bass, trombone, those instruments don't have their pitches divided, and you'll get a nice smooth slide with everything in between. And this is called portamento. And most often, even if an instrument can play portamento, it'll probably still say glissando. Now let's talk about how to make your slides sound good. First, be sure to use a strap to help hold the bass for you. With slides, your hands move around a lot and can really upset the balance of your bass. So using a strap is going to give your hands more freedom. Now the most important tip for slides is this: don't stare at your sliding finger. It's just like when you throw a ball, you don't stare at the ball when you throw it, you look where you want it to end up. So the same thing with the slide. Don't stare at your finger, stare at where you want to end up. So if I want to end up here, I'm going to look here while I slide there. And if you do that, you'll nail it every time. You won't undershoot or overshoot. And it'll be a nice, smooth, even slide. If you stare at your finger, you'll speed up or slow down. Instead. So for a nice smooth slide, stare at the point you're sliding to. Eventually, with most slides, you won't have to look at all. Another tip is don't press too hard. That's a good habit in general, and we've talked about that before, but it really works against you on slides. So the harder you press, the more your finger is going to drag, and you'll have an uneven, choppy sounding slide. So if you practice a lighter touch and see how little pressure you can get away with to slide, you'll find that your slides are much smoother and much easier. As I've mentioned before, for almost all fretting techniques, you want to play or press right behind the fret. So you want to play here, not back here. So the further away you get from that fret, the more problems you have. You'll have muffled notes or buzzes, and you have to press really hard to get rid of them. The closer you are to the fret, the clearer the sound is going to be. So the same thing applies to your slides, that you want your slide to end up right behind the fret. If you don't, you'll get this. A common sliding mistake a lot of students make is this: they don't let the starting note ring out long enough before beginning their slide. So instead of this, they get this. So it's very important that the listener hears that starting note and then the slide. Otherwise, it just sounds like a smear. Another sliding mistake is not playing the correct rhythmic values of the notes that you're sliding between. So instead of doing this, students might do. So just make sure that your notes line up rhythmically where they're supposed to. So a couple of things might bother you about slides. One, you're going to develop some blisters sliding up and down the strings a lot. And that's normal. You'll develop stronger calluses, and it won't be an issue for you. The other thing is string noise. So a lot of people don't like the sound of the string noise, but you should really embrace that that's part of the sound of the instrument. That's part of the sound of the slide. But if it bothers you, you can try different types of strings. So round wound strings have more string noise than flat wounds. And there's types of strings in between, like ground wounds. And then you can also experiment with the EQ settings on your amp or on your bass and dial back some of the high end so that you don't get quite as much of the scratchy string noise. Which finger do I slide with? Well, it's possible to slide with any of your fingers, and you need to practice slides with all of them. So practice half steps, whole steps, fifth slides, etc. But there should be some strategy behind which finger you choose to slide with. So if I were sliding from here C to D with my first finger, but then my next note was down here, F sharp, well, it doesn't make much sense to slide and then immediately shift back. So instead we can plan ahead with our fourth finger, do the slide, and then our first finger is perfectly lined up where it needs to be. Sometimes students have trouble with stability when they slide. They slip off the string maybe. So usually your first and second finger aren't much of a problem, but your third and fourth fingers might be kind of troublesome. So what you can do is touch with your other fingers behind your sliding finger and use them kind of as a guide. So your fingers kind of move up and down the string like a little train. What do I do with my thumb? What happens with your thumb depends on the slide. Most of the time your whole hand will shift with the slide. So your thumb stays somewhere behind your first or second finger. On some shorter slides, like half steps and whole steps, or maybe up higher on the neck, your thumb can stay stationary. If it seems like you're overreaching, shift your thumb with the slide instead. Something to realize is every shift doesn't need to make a slide sound. So sometimes you just need to shift from one place on the fretboard to another. So don't feel tempted to always put a slide in there. Sometimes that can ruin the bass line. Sometimes it's called for. Sometimes it's not. Let's talk about slide notation. Slides are most often notated with a straight line connecting the notes of the slide. Similarly, bass tab connects the fret numbers with a straight ascending or descending line. So an ascending line means an ascending slide, and a descending line means a descending slide. Sometimes nothing is written above the slide line, and other times gliss, short for glissando, or SL, short for slide, is written above the slide line. Another way of notating slides is a jagged line with gliss written above it. Legato slides, where you don't pluck the end note again, have an arced slur line added above or below the slide line. Shift slides, where you do pluck the end note, don't have a slur mark. People's use of these markings is very inconsistent, so I suggest that you listen to a recording whenever you can. A slide into a note is written as an ascending or descending line with no starting point. Grace notes are written in a smaller font size along with a slur in both notation and tab. Grace note slides have a slide line connecting the notes. Without the slide line, it would just be treated as a hammer-on or a pull-off. Again, more on grace notes in a future lesson. Finally, sliding out of a note is written with an ascending or descending line which doesn't connect to any ending note. Another notation for sliding out of a note is a curved line which doesn't connect to another note. So these are more commonly seen in music for horns, and they're called falls and doits, but you might see them in some bass music. Most students find slides frustrating at first. It's normal. Just practice and they'll get better, I promise. On StudyBass.com, you'll find a number of exercises to work on all these different slides, and I suggest a number of songs to work on various slide techniques. I almost forgot one other slide. So this slide goes up and down the low string of your bass with no distinct beginning or ending note. So you often hear it at the beginning of a song or the beginning of a part of a song, but you also hear it after someone cracks a joke. So here's a classic Rodney Dangerfield joke. My psychiatrist told me I'm crazy. I told him, if you don't mind, I'd like a second opinion. He said, all right, you're ugly too.